Starting around mid-March, the average weekly theft was about 210, 211. And we've gotten up to close to 340 now per week in that 4-county area, that metro area.
So while air pollution is down and everybody is gaining weight, except George Brockler, I found out, what is happening with crime numbers? I heard something rather odd, that there are some crimes that are going through the roof. John Kellner is the Chief Assistant Deputy Regional Manager to the 18th Judicial District here.
That's almost my title. You almost nailed it.
All right.
I'm the Chief Deputy DA in charge of 3 of our 4 counties in the 18th Judicial District. It's Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln counties that I'm in charge of. We also have Arapahoe County that rounds out our 4 counties making up the district.
You guys are still prosecuting people, are you not, even though you, for the last month, and you're crawling out of it now, have been stuck at home?
Very much so. So we transitioned to a largely WebEx-based or phone call-in conference system to handle in-custody matters because, of course, there is still crime being committed and people are still being arrested. And so they have to have their due process. They have to be seen by a judge. And if bail is appropriate, those conditions have to be set. So we're meeting that. But in terms of jury trials, that's not happening.
So talk to me about crime. So you deal with the cops and the sheriff's offices, and they're the ones who bring you people and say, this is a crime. You decide whether or not to prosecute. What crimes have gone plummeting in the last month? There must have been some.
So crime generally, if you look at the statistics, it appears to be down. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've got closed bars, right? There's a little less interaction.
Oh, not every bar is closed,
yes.
My friend.
We'll have to work on this one later. But yeah, so social distancing increases. I think officers are a little less likely to be doing some of the active policing that they would do on a normal basis. So just general contact with police is slightly down, which would lead to some reduced numbers. But there are some strange aberrations there. We've got things like auto theft on a huge uptick, really since mid-March.
Really? Tell me about this, because I don't think Colorado's ever been known as a place where cars get stolen a lot. It never struck me as that. I know I've got friends in Boston who says it's rampant. People in LA say it's rampant. I never thought about it here. Mind you, I've never had a car that anyone wanted to steal. So,
well, what do you drive? Let me know. Okay. So,
15-year-old Datsun is not going to.
Yeah, that's not high on the list of cars that people are interested in. But so, out of 4 counties that kind of make up this Denver metro area, and we're talking about Denver, Arapahoe, Adams, Jefferson. We've got this this unit. Basically, it's a metro area crime task force that deals with motor vehicle thefts. And starting around mid-March, the average weekly theft was about 210, 211. And we've gotten up to close to 340 now per week in that 4-county area, that metro area.
So from 200 a week to 350 a week.
Roughly.
Wow.
So nearly 50, 60% increase when you crunch those numbers. I'm not a math guy. I'm a Marine in my former life, so that is not my forte.
So why? Speculate. Why are people stealing cars?
Yeah, it's tough to say for sure, but my intuition, my gut, having done this for a long time as a prosecutor, is that we're seeing a little bit less of people being arrested for, let's say, lower level crimes. In fact, we're seeing a lot less. Officers now are giving what's called a summons. So a piece of paper that says, hey, here's your summons. This is the crime we allege you've committed. There's going to be a date on here for you to show up in court in a few months. And there's good reason for that. They're trying to reduce the jail population because we don't want to have outbreaks in a confined space with people in jail. So they're setting this out, and remains to be seen in this experiment whether or not people are actually going to show up for those court dates in the future. But typically speaking, if those people had ended up in court, the judge would set some kind of monitoring in place, something like check in with a pretrial officer.
So just jumping to the punchline, are you saying that if these people were arrested, they would have been pulled out of society, basically, or monitored or something, and therefore would be less likely to go steal cars?
So if we pull the thread on this a little bit, what I'm thinking is that when somebody gets into the judicial system and there's either monitoring or an admonishment even from a judge, a little bit of something that says, hey, you've got some consequences potentially for this criminal act that you've alleged to have been committed, right? at that point, when there's some monitoring in place, I'm thinking that those folks probably back off from what they were committing. Now, at this point, what we're seeing out and about is a lot more summons, so potentially
Interesting.
less interaction with the court system.
I would think, I get it. I would think that armed robberies would be going down, that burglaries would be going down because people are at home all the time. I would think that, hold-ups and stick-ups and shoplifting would all go plummeting. But why cars? I mean, out of all the crimes you can do, you could still break into some store and steal stuff. Cars? Is there anything else that's going haywire?
Well, just real quick on that. I mean, cars, it's actually a pretty easy target for somebody who's trying to make a quick buck. You know, if it's something that you have inside your car that they want to steal and then pawn, a lot of potential addicts look at cars and they see, here's a quick way for me to find some money. So it's a real deal. I mean, it's a real problem right now, especially when you think about in the middle of this pandemic, right? If maybe you want to go run that essential errand to the grocery store, you don't even have your car, or go to your essential job and you don't have a vehicle anymore. So other things that we're seeing out there, burglaries are on the rise a little bit. There are some actual statistics published in Denver of some increases in burglaries for marijuana shops, which are high cash, target-rich type
environments. Commercial
burglaries
are going up. I would think, tell me if I'm wrong, residential burglaries have to be going down.
I haven't pulled the stats on that, but what I'm seeing anecdotally in terms of what we're seeing in court, I would agree with that.
Fascinating. Hey, before we run out of time, I want to ask you about the other part of your job, which I found really fascinating. You do cold cases, all right? These are just amazing to me and a lot of people, that something that's been sitting around for years or even a decade or two all of a sudden becomes a real live case again. How many cold cases are there in your area?
Roughly 160 murders, cold case murders in our jurisdiction. And that number's fluctuated. It's gone down considerably from when we started our cold case unit in 2013. But every 3 years, if a case remains unsolved, of course, that's going to add another number.
How much has DNA science changed cold cases?
It's been immense. So 2 ways that we typically solve these crimes is from some advance in DNA, and right now the sort of wave we're riding is with genetic genealogy. And then the other thing is change in circumstances between witnesses that might now be willing to come forward with information. But to talk to you about DNA for a little bit, you might have heard about the Golden State Killer in 2018 in California.
Yes.
So that person was identified through genetic genealogy. Basically, all these databases that people are putting their DNA in willingly, trying to find long-lost family members, do Ancestry.com type stuff. Well, law enforcement tapped into that resource and was able to load a genetic profile for a suspect and then search against all these millions of other profiles out there to try and find a familial relationship. And once they found something that seemed close enough, they contact those witnesses, the people that uploaded the information, and ask them, okay, tell me about your family tree. And they might find out, okay, well, you had a cousin who shares enough genetic information with you and is in the age range of our suspect. And then they might go try and find that person and ask for their DNA or surreptitiously get their DNA and see if it is in fact their suspect. And we just had a big breakthrough in Douglas County using that same technology.
Really? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so the Clanton case is a defendant who recently pled guilty. We're actually pending sentencing. It was supposed to have already happened, but coronavirus pushed that out. And he committed the murder of Helene Przinski in 1980. She was a young lady from the East Coast who came out here to actually Englewood. She was an intern at a radio station, was kidnapped out of Englewood. Her body was found. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death in a field in Douglas County. So using genetic genealogy, we had a profile for this suspect, unknown person, and fascinating stuff. We worked with Mitch Morrissey's company, actually, and found a suspect, actually many suspects.
But by using Ancestry.com or 23andMe or something like that, you tapped into that database to do and you found the guy.
Yep. Found him in Florida.
Incredible. All right, help me with this part, because from a policy point of view, I'm torn on this. The idea that I go to 23andMe to learn more about myself doesn't mean that I'm giving permission for a government to take a look at my genetic material. I don't want insurance companies taking a look at my, I see a little gene there, we're going to deny him life insurance. I want privacy to do this. There are a lot of people who were pretty upset with the Golden Gate case, saying, wait a second, I never signed on to let the cops start searching my very building blocks of life.
And I think that's a legitimate concern. In fact, what you mentioned, there being some backlash, already took place. So when I'm talking about our case, it's very, very different. There's already been privacy settings put in place for people to opt in, say, I do want to share that information with law enforcement. And so that's available to us. We're not able to just tap into everybody who would at any point put their genetic information into one of these systems. If we actually wanted to try and get something like that, we'd have to get a warrant. But right now we're operating off of people's consent. So very different. They've made an informed decision. And some folks, of course, said no. But when we run into a roadblock trying to put together a family tree, a lot of times the detectives reach out to those folks and say, hey, I think this could really help us solve this crime. Would you be willing to? And by and large, we found people saying, yes, we're willing to share that information for a limited purpose.
Fascinating. So you were able to take care of that cold case. How do you decide which one to look at? Because my guess is if you have 173 on your plate, you cannot give the same amount of resources to each and every one. So as a prosecutor and the police departments as well, what do you look at and go, this one feels ripe now, that one we're going to have to wait on?
So this has been a whole big process for us. And when you're building a unit from the ground up, we're basically coming up with criteria to triage all these cases. And we went through all these files, and we started looking at cases, of course, where we thought, is there something we can test with new DNA science or any new type of science to get a lead? And we prioritized those. We also looked at cases where you have sort of more intimate type settings with a suspect and a victim in terms of the killing. It's a really weird way of saying things like a knife as the murder method or strangulation, much more likely to have left DNA on some of the evidence as opposed to something like an outdoor shooting where there's much less likelihood of a contact with the suspect.
Let me kick it back to you. So a drive-by shooting, there might not be a whole lot of genetic material, there's not a whole lot of evidence, but something that was a gruesome hands-on murder, there might be, at which point you can now use the new science, new data, and try to do it.
That's a fair summary.
It's got to be remarkably satisfying to crack a case like that decades later and bring some resolution to the family members who must be haunted by this. At the same time, it has just got to be gruesome, weird, awful, inhuman kind of work.
Well, I'll talk about the satisfaction piece. I will say when we first started the unit, I remember looking at Helene Brzezinski's case and thinking, this is 1980. It's unlikely we're going to be able to solve this crime, but let's give it a crack anyway. And we worked on it for years, but really it was the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and their cold case unit that put in the old school, shoe leather type detective work to track down the family trees and figure that stuff out. Fantastic work by them, gave us a great case to prosecute and ultimately led to the defendant pleading guilty. In terms of the other stuff, that kind of comes with the territory of being a prosecutor. Certainly my time as a Marine, you saw some things you wish you could unsee. Same thing with being a prosecutor. You just try to leave it at work, not take it home, and remember the end goal, right? Some justice for somebody that's been yearning for it.
Hey, appreciate you spending some time with us. Fascinating stories.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.